Everyone. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and we are back for another week of PIRKEI AVOS, the ethics of our fathers. And for those of you that are zooming in, you'll see a different perspective and a different background tonight. For those of you that are in the room, you'll see something you haven't seen in a year and a half. It's called the live shear. So we are trying to transition from the world of COVID and Zooming for the last year and a half, slowly but surely transitioning into live shiurim. And Baruch Hashem, there's such a nice group of people that are here tonight. We're actually sitting down at the table to have the feeling that even though there's a computer on the table, that we're actually learning like the good old days. So for those of you that are here, Yashikayach for breaking the ice. For those of you on Zoom, come and bring your towel and break the ice together with us. We'll be zooming and learning in person for as long as we need to, but Be'ez Hashem, we'll get back to as regular as possible. So the Mishnah that we're going to be learning this week in PIRKEI AVOS, different prints, it's different numbers, but in this print that I have right here is PIRKEI, the 5th chapter, and it is Mishnah Yud Zayin. It is the 17th Mishnah. I assume that in the art school it's probably a different one. It's probably the 5th chapter, but probably somewhere in the 20s. And the Mishnah says like this: Kol machlekes shehi l'shem shamayim. Any machlekes, any argument that is l'shem shamayim, that is made between two people or two factions, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, seifel liyiskayim, in the end it will endure. Anytime that you have a machlekes, you have an argument between people that is going on, one says one thing, one says the other, but they're doing it l'shem shamayim, it's all with the right intentions for the sake of heaven. Says the Mishnah, it will endure, it will last forever. However, v'she'enu l'shem shamayim, if the machlekes, if the argument that's going on is not for the sake of heaven, ein seifel liyiskayim, at the end of the day, it will not endure, it will not last. It will disappear before you know it. What exactly defines, what is the case of a machlekes, an argument that took place and it was l'shem shamayim, was for the sake of heaven? Says the Mishnah, zu machlekes Hillel v'Shammai. The two great sages, Hillel and Shammai, who argued about basically everything. So their machlekes, when they argued, it was all for the sake of heaven. We have to discuss what the sake of heaven means, but it was all for the sake of heaven. As a result, their machlekes, their argument endures. We're still sitting in the Beis Midrash. We're still sitting in yeshivas. We are still learning the machlekes, the arguments between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. They have not disappeared. However, v'she'enu l'shem shamayim. However, what is the machlekes that is not l'shem shamayim, that is not for the sake of heaven? Zu machlekes korach v'chol adasai. This is the machlekes, the argument which transpired between Korach and his adasai and his cronies that were together with him. So that's why we're learning this Mishnah, because it's really this week's parsha. This is the parsha of Korach, when Korach decides to rebel against Moshe Rabbeinu. And if you rebel against Moshe, you're really rebelling against Hashem. And Korach picked a fight with the wrong person. He picked a fight with someone who everything that came out of his mouth and everything that he touched and everything that he did up until that point, it all came true. So why Korach decided to start out with Moshe Rabbeinu is a mystery which Rashi deals with and the other Mefarshim deal with. But although that Korach claimed that his machlekes, that the argument that he had on Moshe Rabbeinu was valid and he was just in what he was saying, the Mishnah tells us that it was not l'shem shamayim. It was not an argument that was for the sake of heaven. And as a result, lo yiskayim, it did not endure, it did not last. As we know, the earth opens up and Korach falls inside together with all of his cronies, his adasai, the nation that is together with him. They disappear from this earth. We don't hear about them anymore. So the first point that I'd like to make in the Mishnah tonight is that the Mishnah seems to be saying that if you're arguing for the right reasons, then there's nothing wrong with having an argument. This, that we believe that every argument is a terrible thing and husbands and wives should never disagree on anything and children and their parents should never disagree, and friends should never disagree, and the Anhala who's running the school should say one thing, and the parent body should say something else. They're never allowed to disagree. The Mishnah doesn't say that. The Mishnah says that if a person is arguing one on the other, but it's being done in the right way, meaning that each party that's involved is l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, whatever exactly that means. So then the Mishnah is telling us that's a machlekes, that's an argument that is justified, that's an argument that is allowed to be, and that is an argument that will be skayim, that will endure and it will last forever. As the Mishnah brings an example of Hillel and Shammai, their argument has lasted for over 2,000 years already. So if that's the case, so then not every single machlekes, not every single argument under the sun is a terrible thing. However, the Mishnah is telling us that if you don't know what you're arguing about, or you're not arguing l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, for the right things, then you better keep your mouth shut, because you don't have a right to argue with anybody. Because if your argument is coming from the wrong place, if your argument, as we're going to see, is being motivated by something else besides what l'shem shamayim means, so then you are bound and you are headed for failure. You are headed for arguments, for fighting. You are headed for people that are going to leave the room in a very angry and upset mood as a result of that argument which is taking place. So you have two ways to argue. One way is l'shem shamayim. You can do that. You're like on the level of Hillel and Shammai, go for it. If you can't, if you're like a Korach v'Adasai, if you are Korach and his nation that is together with him, then a person has no right to enter into the world of machlekes, because it's only going to create difficulties and dissension and hatred and the like. And the end of the story of Korach is not a very pretty story. Korach gets swallowed up together with everyone that gathered around him.
Does Zoom classes tolerate questions?
So the question on the floor right now is, do Zoom classes tolerate questions? I don't want to start an argument over this, so I will allow for the questions in the class. Yes.
So Shammai and Hillel, when they argued, were arguing over halachic points and Torah.
Correct.
And instructions on what should go on in the base of Mikdash. And Korach actually was arguing a Torah point himself, at least trying to, that I'm a Levi, you're a Levi Moshe, I should be entitled to the kahuna, whatever.
Yes.
So Victor and I have a dispute over a car. I say the car is $5,000. He says he gave me the $5,000. I said, so it's just a civil issue, okay? And he has a legitimate point, and I have a legitimate point. So is a dispute in the sake of heaven have to be like a Torah issue, or could it be a civil issue that people are being honest with each other and they're just disagreeing?
Okay, good. We'll see. What?
Can I answer that?
Sure.
Questions and
Wow, this is really getting tough. Yes, go ahead.
The argument that Korach made wasn't valid because his motives weren't pure.
100%.
Huh?
100%, right.
That's it.
So I'm getting, but can we? He still had a Torah basis for his argument, and he was still wait.
Okay, stop arguing, guys. All right. Okay.
No, so back to the civil.
Okay, so the question on the floor is that when it says that you're not allowed, you can only have an argument that's l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, is that only in Torah terms, when you're talking about Torah terminology, halacha, what it means in this verse, what that Gemara means, or could it also be in the mundane matters of this world? Can a person be l'shem shamayim in that respect? We'll have to see. Be'ez Hashem, we'll see. So the Rabbi Yerucham from the Mir comments on this Mishnah, and he says over the following idea. He says it's very hard to understand what the Mishnah is telling us in the world of Korach, because in the Mishnah it says that the only thing that Korach did wrong was that he had a machlekes. He made an argument that was l'shem shamayim, that was not for the sake of heaven. Ask Rabbi Yerucham, that's all that he did wrong? That's the only thing that Korach did that the Mishnah is going to highlight, which was so terrible about him? We know, as he writes over here, Korach was someone who he expressed, he was niskan Korach minisiyasai. He had jealousy because he wanted that he should have the rights of being the nasi, being the not the high priest, but the prince over here, he was bikesh kavod, was sorel atzmai. He wanted special honor and he wanted rulership for himself. He wanted all these terrible things, and yet the Mishnah only tells us, you know what was wrong with Korach? When he argued, he did it for the wrong reasons. And says Rabbi Yerucham, what do you mean he did it for the wrong reasons? That's the only thing that Korach did wrong. He had all of these other false ulterior motives over here, which are worse than a machlekes shelo l'shem shemayim. A person who is seeking honor, a person that is bearing jealousy, a person that has hatred for another person. These are terrible, terrible things. So why is the Mishnah focusing in on over here the fact that Korach was a machlekes? He was arguing shelo l'shem shemayim, not for the sake of heaven. So Rabbi Yerucham writes the following idea. And he says that in reality, as many of the Mefarshim say, Korach came along, and when he was complaining to Moshe Rabbeinu, why should it be that you are going to be the leader? Why should it be that Aaron HaKohen is the Kohen? Why should it be that your nephew is getting first rights over here, being a Nasi, being a prince? I'm also entitled. Now, was Korach, in the way that he represented himself, was he saying it in a way that since that I deserve covered like everybody else, so therefore I want that, and why are you taking it away from me? Or was Korach saying that it seems to be that the higher the position is that the person has in Klal Yisrael, the greater chance they have of getting closer to Hashem? Moshe Rabbeinu, no one is going to deny that there's nobody closer in the world to Hashem than you are. Neither will anybody deny that there's nobody second in command or greater in his relation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu than your brother Aaron HaKohen. And certainly, if there's room right now for someone to become a Nasi, to become a prince, so it must be that a prince is on a higher echelon of Ruchnias, spirituality than other people. And therefore, if I could only be appointed to that position, so then I myself would be privileged to have a higher level in my relationship of the ruchnius, of the connection between me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, at the core of what Korach seemed to be asking was not selfishly because I want the honor, I want the glory, I want everybody to stand up for me when I walk into the room. But rather, when Korach was asking for a position that he felt rightfully belonged to him and his family, he was saying it for altruistic reasons, that I would like an opportunity to get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way in which you, Moshe, can, the way in which your brother Aaron HaKohen can, and his children. I would also, I have, as he writes over here, Rabbi Yuchim says, he says that it was Shemigoydel Chukasam Lis Alois Beruchniusam Mala Mala, from the great desire that Korach had to elevate himself higher and higher in his ruchnias and his spirituality. That's why he was asking for this that he was asking for. So he paints the picture of himself that he's a tzaddik. He paints the picture of himself that he is l'shem shemayim, that he is for the sake of heaven over here. I'm not arguing with you, Moshe Rabbeinu. I understand you have a mission that you have to do. You have a job that Hashem has given you, and that is to appoint a nasi, to appoint a prince. I understand that. My argument is that just as you have been worthy of having your precious and your unique relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm asking myself for the same thing. Says the Mishnah in PIRKEI AVOS, Ela shegilu lanu Chazal, the sages are revealing to us the following, and that is, ki ba'oimik kavanasam, at the root of the kavanah, of the intention of Korach, haisa machlokaisam shaloi l'shem shemayim. In reality, that which he was asking for, which he said, I want close to Hashem, kirvas elokim litayv, to be close to Hashem, that's what's really good. The reality is, at the root of what he was asking, it was not l'shem shemayim, it was not for the sake of heaven at all. It really was because he was jealous of Moshe. It really was because he wanted special covet, special honor for himself. It really was because he felt that he deserves a level over other people because of the family that he's coming from and what he saw into the future, who his children are going to be. It wasn't because he simply was striving for the emes, striving for the truth. It was really because there was selfishness that was in the heart and the mind of Korach. As a result, says the Mishnah, it might look like on the surface that a person is acting l'shem shemayim. It might look like on the surface that they have the greatest intentions in the world, and this is all for the sake of Hashem. It's all for emes. It's all for ruchnius. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what's really in the heart of a person. And the Mishnah is being Megal, is revealing to us that Korach, who seemed to imply that he had a tremendous tshuka, tremendous desire to go up and up and up and up in ruchnius. That's really his arguments with Moshe Rabbeinu. If you'd have a talis that was made out of techelis, so does it need strings of techelis on the edge? So that's ridiculous, he said. So too, if you have a Jewish nation that are kulam tzaddikim, or all righteous people, does one deserve bias, deserves greatness over the other? We all have the opportunity to come close to Hashem. He was claiming in what he wanted that every single Jew has a right to their own precious and their private relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But at the core of it all, as Rabbi Yochanan is saying over here, at the core of it all, it's not true. It was really being motivated by the wrong things. And this is how you know the difference between l'shem shemayim and not l'shem shemayim. What's l'shem shemayim? Why is such an unusual language that Chazal use? Tell me it's l'shem Hashem. It's for the sake of Hashem. I'm doing something for the sake of Hashem. I'm doing something l'shem l'man ha'emes, for the sake of the emes. Why do we use the vernacular of l'shem shemayim, for the sake of shemayim? What is shemayim? Shemayim is not heavens that we see up in the sky. Shemayim is the realm in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu lives. Shemayim is the realm in which malachim, which the angels exist. Shemayim is the place where there is no pettiness that we have down here in this world. That's what Shemayim is. It is a place that is a spiritual realm which is void of all of the tears, all of the pressures, all of the worries, all the concerns, all of the desires of this world. That's what Shemayim is. Someone that wants to be l'shem Shemayim, that means that their motivation behind the actions that they are doing is not because of my worldly endeavors down here. It's not because I need to be right, or I need to be stroked, or I need for people to acknowledge me that I'm someone that is great. Rather, when my actions are l'shem shemayim, for the sake of heaven, that means whatever I'm doing right now is that I should be above and beyond everything that is lowly down here in this world. And I should be living in a plane of ruchnius, of spirituality, that is void of all of those things that draw a person down here into the emptiness of this world. Says the Mishnah, the only machlekes, the only argument that could work in this world, the only machlekes that will endure, the only machlekes that has a chance of surviving, is an argument that is purely l'shem shemayim, which means not about myself, not what I believe is true, not what I believe is the right thing, but rather when there is no ulterior motives at all in what I'm saying. Rather, I am striving and seeking and probing to achieve and to reach the emes, the truth. That is an argument that is l'shem shemayim.
That's the essence of the Gemara.
What?
That's the essence of the Gemara.
Very excellent. So the excellent. If you look at all of Shas, if you look at all of Talmud, if you look at even in the Midrashim when there's arguments, that's all they do is argue. Were they arguing, I'm right and you're wrong? Rabbi Akiva said, I'm right and Rabbi Yochanan, you're wrong. Is that what was going on? Was Shammai saying, no, I'm right, Hillel, and you're wrong? And Hillel said, no, you're wrong and I'm right? That's like two little children. That's not what the arguments were. That means each one and every machlekes, every argument that we have throughout all of Shastra, all the Gemara is that each one is probing the depths of the truth of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is actually saying. You have a pasuk we just had this morning. We had one pasuk in Daf Yomi. One Mandomer says like this, and then one opinion says no, that's what the verse means. And then there's a third opinion that says no, the verse really means like this. What are they? They just want to put the other person down. That means that each one understands in their world of Shemayim, in their world of Hashem Shemayim, in their world of emes, of truth, each one understood the verse in a different way. And they're arguing between each other they're arguing between each other what is the right, and they're arguing between each other what is the emes, what is the truth, and what is not the truth. When two people sit in the basement, I just heard a beautiful Maisa last night. Rav Moshe Tuv Yalif was here in LA last night, and he was speaking about the Koyach HaTorah, the power of Torah. And he said over that he used to live in Cleveland, and he had a base midrash at nights that he was running, like a night kola that he was running. And there was a very highfalutin. See, that's why I have to be here live tonight. Yeah, and there was a highfalutin, doctor or lawyer that had found out about this kollel, and he heard that when they learn together, that it's very loud and noisy, and they really get into it. And he's coming from academia. In academia, you walk in the library, and if you turn the page too loud, they're going to throw you out of there. He wanted very much to see what was the learning like in the kollel. He wanted to sit for like an hour or two with these guys, and he wanted just to watch them learn. So Rav Liff said, no problem. He wants to come and learn with us. He wants to come and sit and watch us learn. He can. But only one thing. I'm not learning any different than I normally learn. Just because he's sitting next to me or sitting at the table, I'm not going to translate what the Gemara means. I'm not going to translate the Rashi. I'm not going to try to explain to him so he should understand. I'm learning. He wants to observe what the learning of Torah is like. Let him observe it the way that it is. I'm not changing one iota of what it is that I do. He said, fine. I just want to come and see. So he comes into the kollel, an academic, professor, I think he was a well-to-do person as well. He walks in and he sits down. And Rabbi Leif, he said he was learning at that time in the kollel. His chavrusa was like a super genius. And they went into a very hard sugya, a very difficult part of the Gemara. And they were going back and forth and screaming and yelling and arguing and fighting and pounding on the table and going through the words back and forth, everything. And he said that this man, this secular Jew, who was sitting in the kollel, he was sitting there absolutely mesmerized. For 2 hours, he did not stir from his seat. He didn't understand one word that they were saying. He had no idea what the subject matter was about. He didn't know what they're arguing about. But he understood that you had two people that were sitting there and screaming their heads off at each other, and they were fighting over the truth. That is a machlokes. That is l'shem shemaim. That is for the sake of heaven. Lihiskayim, it will endure. It has endured. The arischa deraisa, as we call it, the battles that take place in the Beis HaMidrash, the battles that take place between Talmidei Chacham, between scholars, the battles that take place in the world of Jewish thought to try to get to the emes of the understanding. So all of those continue to go on day after day after day. If you walk into any yeshiva, any kollel, any Beis Midrash that is there, you should see, in a normal circumstance, the decibels of volume should be so high that it will hurt your ears when you walk in. Most secular people, when they will open the door to a Beis Midrash that is packed with hundreds and hundreds of boys that are sitting and learning, they close the door in fright because they have no idea what's going on over there. They hear the roar of Torah. They hear the roar of the lines that are going over there. I remember the first time that I walked in the yeshiva's mirror for Elulzman, and I was with my brother-in-law. He said he wanted to stand next to me when I opened the door for the first time. And I opened the door, and you're 1,000 people sitting in the Beis Midrash learning. Just goes to show that I was late for the first day. Yeah, but there were 1,000 people that were learning in that room. And they're fighting, not selfishly. That's the way it's supposed to be. I'm not fighting because I have to be right. I'm fighting because I want to get to what the emes is. What is the truth? And therefore, if I will be able to understand that what you're saying is the right thing and I'm wrong, then I will be able to admit that you are right and that I am wrong. Pesach Chron tells over the famous Maaseh with his Rebbe, Rav Shalom Shadron, who used to learn, I think it was with Rav Leib Chasman, if I'm not mistaken. And they were learning once a piece of Gemara together. And Rav Shalom Shadran was a young bacher at the time, and anybody who knows his energy levels was high energy levels. He was an excitable person. He was very enthusiastic about his learning all the time. So anyway, he was learning with his Rebbe, was a Rosh Hashiva, was a giant of Torah, and they were arguing about a certain point. And as much as Reb Shalom tried to explain his point that he was right, it was becoming increasingly clear throughout the discourse of the conversation that he was wrong and that his Rebbe was correct. So his Rebbe said, Shalom, he says, you understand that what you're saying cannot be true. So he nodded his head. So he says, that means that I'm right and you're wrong. So he said, nodded his head again. So he said, Reb Shalom, I want to hear the words out of your mouth. I want you to say that, Rebbe, you are right and I am wrong. Well, he said, if you're right, so then I can't be right. So he says, I want to hear the words because it's necessary for a person who's fighting a machlekes l'shem shemayim, that when they get to that crossroads over there between the emes going this way and the emes going that way, and they hear somebody else is right and they're wrong, they have to be humble enough to be able to admit that I'm wrong and you're right. And this is the machlekes that people carry with them into their marriages. Every husband will tell you that in any argument that he ever has with his wife, I am right and she is wrong. And they will always tell you that when I'm fighting this machlekes over here, it is l'shem shemayim, as it ever is, like Hillel and Shammai. What goes on? My wife might not be l'shem shemayim, but I guaranteed I would not hold my ground and I would not put my foot down and I would not try to get my point across unless I'm l'shem shalom bayis. It's for the sake of shalom bayis. If only my wife will realize how wrong she is, then we'll be able to have better shalom bayis. Is that l'shem shemayim, or is that the sham that Korach was saying over here as well? I'm l'shem shemayim. I want to get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I want to bring more kedusha into my life. I want my children also to feel good about themselves, that they also have a great yichus like their cousins do. At the end of the day, the Mishnah says, Korach, don't fool yourself, because you didn't fool HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rather, what did you do? See, I'm not used to this. When there's Zoom, you have no idea what anybody's doing behind you.
He just
So
targeted the screen.
anybody can get away with everything. There's people yawning. There's people on the phone. There's people here. Okay, we'll break ourselves back into this over the time.
Rabbi, you can check on this next story. We started Daf Yomi just 2 months before the COVID shutdown.
Yes.
So it's now April, and the court systems don't even know what they're going to do, and we're doing phone-in, trying to keep the calendar. And I'm trying to listen to your Daf class, and I didn't move the button, and I'm waiting for the judge to call my case. And you hear all these people with dogs are barking, alarm clocks are going on, and I'm listening to my Daf because who cares what they're doing until they call my case. And she says, "Can you people please mute your microphones?" She says, "There's some fighting going on. It sounds like it was just you teaching us the Daf."
Okay. So that's what we're saying over here. We're saying that the nature of machlekes, the nature of fighting, of arguments, of dissension between people is, if you're not l'shem shemayim, if you are not for the sake of heaven, if you are not doing things because you are altruistic about what you want to achieve, but rather there are ulterior motives, or you have an agenda. That, I guess I would say that in English is the most likely thing that is going on when you begin arguing with somebody else. You have an agenda that you want to get across. Not that you care so much about the truth. Not that you really care so much about the other person and making sure that they have what they need and they're taken care of. But rather, you have your own biases. You have your own intentions. You have your own agendas. You have your own things that you would like to accomplish in this discussion or this argument that is there. And therefore, you're not willing to listen and to hear that which is being said. So Rabbi Nachman of Breslov says over on this mission the following idea. He says, a person should stay far away from all types of arguments. Especially when you hear a person say, "No, I'm in this l'shem shemayim over here." That's when you know you have to stay away, because the more l'shem shemayim that a person says that they are, the more you can be guaranteed that there's a deep agenda that's going on, and they're trying to cover it up. The way that you can tell if a machlekes is really l'shem shemayim, he writes, is if in you know what? I wanted to go back further a little bit. We'll get there in a second. He writes like this. He quotes many different chazal and many different words of chazal that shows you how terrible machlekes is. And just to quote you one, because it's in this week's parsha. Boyu re'ei, kamakasha machlekes. Come and take a look how difficult machlekes is. Shebezdin shamaylein kainsin elami ben chaf. In the heavens, when the court acts upon a person, it only punishes a person when they're 20 years old. Ubezdin shalmata, the court of law down here in this world can already try a person mi ben yud gimel when they're 13 years old. However, machlakusa shel korach, but when it came to this machlekes of korach, tinoikais b'nei yoiman nisserfu v'nivlo, children that were only 1 day old were burned up and they were swallowed alive in the pit. Says the Midrash. So what do you see from there? You see that a machlekes is the worst of all, because it will even destroy the life of a child that somehow gets swallowed up inside of there. Kamakasha machlekes, ki kol ha'oizev v'machlekes HaKadosh Baruch Hu ma'aben es zichrei. Anybody who gets involved with machlekes, with fighting and arguments, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take the memory out of this world. Ach ikar hatzari shebekol machlekes mabishim oiseb l'shem shemayim. That's what he writes. You know what the worst part of every machlekes is? Everybody tries to convince themselves and everybody else, I'm l'shem shemayim. I've got the right intentions over here. You think I mean any harm for you? You think I'm doing this because you think I need this? Do I need this? Does my covet need this? Does my honor? I don't need this. You think I'm doing this for myself? I am doing this l'shem shemayim. L'zayis ba Tana v'nosen simin. Therefore, the Tana, the author of our Mishnah, is giving a sign. My machlekes l'shem shemayim. What is a machlekes that is l'shem shemayim? And what is a machlekes that is not l'shem shemayim? How do you know when something is for the sake of heaven? How do you know when your intention is pure? How do you know that it has nothing at all to do with yourself? There's no selfishness involved. That's when the machlekes endures, which means, as he says so beautifully over here, what does it mean that it endures? Look at Shammai and Hillel. The example in the Mishnah is Shammai and Hillel. Shammai and Hillel, they argued for years and years and years and years about what is the halacha. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu say? What does the Torah want from us in this situation? They argued and they argued and they argued. Now you would think that after so many years of arguments, you would think that they would be enemies with each other. You would think they would hate each other. You would think that Shammai would say, I'll never let my daughter marry somebody from the house of Beis Hillel. These people they're so irate. They're so obstinate. And you would think that someone from Beis Hillel's house would say, there's no way that these people, Beis Shammai, they're so machmir, they're so strict on everything. I'm not going to let my daughter marry into such a family. The Gemara says the exact opposite. The Gemara says that as much as Shammai and Hillel fought it out in the Beis Midrash, as much as they argued over the meaning of a halacha, over the meaning of a pasuk, of a verse, over what it was, the ratzon, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from them, nevertheless, the Gemara tells us they had no problem making shidduchim with their children. And when they would go to the chasana, you would see the big days over there, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, sitting, the happy father, the mechutanim next to each other. The son is in the middle. The daughter's there with the mothers over there on the other side. The dancing is lebedik. All the Talmidim of Beis Shammai's Beis Midrash, they came to dance by the chasana. all the students from the basement of Hillel, they came to dance at the chassid, and everybody was dancing together as one. And it was the happiest night, the happiest chassid anybody could remember. Says Rabbi Nachman, that's the siman, that's the sign. When a machlokes is l'shem shemayim, when there's not one trace, not 1 ounce of hatred that exists between the two parties that are involved, when there's no ill feelings, when all that I'm trying to do is get to the emes, get to the truth. It's not about me. It's about the truth. It's not about me. It's about what's best for our marriage. It's not about me. It's about what's best for the company. It's not about me. It's about what's best for the shul. It has nothing to do with me. I just want the emes in this world. I just want HaKadosh Baruch Hu's glory to be perceived. I just want to make sure that there's shalom bayis, that there's simcha, that there's joy. That's all I want. So says the Mishnah, if that in fact is what your intention is, so then the iskaim, the net machlekes, it will endure. What does it mean that will endure? The machlekes can continue on because you're still fighting over what's the truth and what is not the truth, but it never interferes with the interpersonal relationships that you're going to have with the other person.
So how do you explain when who was the one that was against the Chabad many years ago, and he tried to oust Chabad, the famous rabbi?
Rav Shach?
No, before that, the Chabad movement, and he was against it, but he said it was the wrong movement, and they tried to oust the Chabad. Is that l'shem shemayim?
The Vilna Gaon?
The Vilna Gaon.
Yeah, the Vilna Gaon was not Chabad. It was Chasidus in general.
Whatever, right.
Okay, that was a machlokes. Certainly l'shem shemayim. The Vilna Gaon wasn't enough. He had nothing invested for himself. He felt, again, we're not gonna get into this what the argument was, but the Vilna Gaon felt that the world of Chasidus was not enrooted in the Torah the way that he felt that the world where he was coming from was, and therefore he felt that it was going to be more dangerous than beneficial to the Jewish people. In the 2020 hindsight that we have, so the world cannot exist without the Vilna Gaons, and the world cannot exist without the Baal Shem Tovs. The world cannot exist without the yeshivas of Slobodka, nor could it exist without the yeshivas of Gur and Ger and Satmar and the like. So, but when the Vilna Gaon was arguing over there at that time, his argument was 100% l'shem shemayim. It wasn't about the Vilna Gaon. It was about what is best for Klal Yisrael. And if in fact he felt that it would have been best for Klal Yisrael, he wouldn't have argued on it. But he felt that it was going to bring about his sarashlis, a weakening in the learning of Torah. He felt that it would bring about a weakening in the perception of the koiches, the greatness that a person has inside of them. And he felt that it wouldn't be what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants.
So interestingly enough, applying the formula that we're learning tonight, the machlokas that is in the Shem Shemayim will endure. So to Victor's question, did that argument, the Vilna Gaon's argument endure?
The argument has still endured, because you will still find in the annals or the annals of the Beis HaMidrash and the Klal Yisrael, you will still find that this is an argument that is ongoing for 200, 300 years already. You will find such a thing, but the Litvaks don't hate the Hasidim, and the Hasidim don't hate the Litvaks. And if they do, if there's sinas chinam, that's what Rabbi Nachman is saying, or if you will find sina between people, then we have to say that the machlekes is not l'shem shemayim. I could be disappointed. I could not agree with a person. I could feel maybe that the way that my mahalach, my direction is better in life, but I'm not gonna hate the person that's standing there in front of me. So that's what he writes over here, and he says, Tivchan teikav u'miyadim pratis beinu lebeneim oivim zeh zeh. If you can sense that the two people that are arguing are really oivim zeh zeh, they really love each other, they care about each other, they like each other, kirak machlekes bi'ikarim, the only thing that's standing between them is the machlekes, the argument over whatever the point is. Zu machlekes l'shem shemayim. This, in fact, is an argument that is for the sake of heaven. אבל אם נסהבה מזה שנאה, שאחד אינו יכול לדבר עם השני. However, if you find that there's anger and there's hatred between them, and one cannot speak with the other, siman shimachleikis she'ena l'shem shemayim. That's a clear sign that the argument is not for the sake of heaven. V'seifa she'ena miskayemes, and at the end it will not endure. And I think that this is for ourselves, that this is the lesson that we have to bring home with us to our homes, to our marriages, to our child rearing, to our communities, to our kehilas and everything. And that is that you're allowed to be at odds. You're allowed not to agree. This concept that a husband and wife can never disagree, it's not necessarily a Torah concept. You're allowed to disagree. We're two different people. I'm a he, she's a she. That's already biologically and everything that's already different. She was raised in one house, I was raised in another house. My tchunas hanefesh, my personality is different, her personality is different. My interests are different, my hobbies are different, my emotional world is different. Everything is different about us. So it's only natural that when you have two different people that are so disparate and so different, they're not going to agree on everything. How could they agree on everything? If they would agree on everything, there's something wrong with that. That doesn't make any sense. So therefore, a husband and a wife are allowed to disagree. But I'm not disagreeing with my wife because I have to be right and I have to prove that she's wrong. That's not the way that it works. I'm disagreeing with my wife because I would like to understand what is going to be best for the shalom bayis in this marriage. I'd like to know what is the best way to handle this particular situation. I feel differently about things than you do. Let's work it out. Working it out is not room for a machlekes that is going to be the hatred one with the other. Working it out is, let's seek the common ground. Let's seek the truth. Let's seek what is best. And sometimes, yes, sometimes it means that in order to avoid the machlekes, a person is going to have to be a mavater. They're going to have to overlook that which is being said by the other person. Meaning, had Korach simply said, you know what? Moshe Rabbeinu is always right. He hasn't been wrong yet. And everything that he says that comes out of his mouth is true. So you know what? Even though that I feel justified in my claim that I deserve to be the nasi instead of my cousin over here, but let me just back down and step away right now and leave it alone. Because if I get involved in this machlekes, in this argument, if I get involved and the wrong things end up coming, which is going to be hatred, scoffing at Moshe Rabbeinu, making fun of the Torah, so then what do I gain? I gain absolutely nothing. Sometimes when a person gets into a situation where there is machlekes, where there is fighting that is taking place, the way in which they're going to avoid a machlekes shalol l'shem shemayim is just don't get involved at all. And that's the truth. One of the diyukim, one of the points that they make in the Mishnah is, what's a machlekes that's l'shem shemayim for the sake of heaven? Hillel and Shammai. That's two different people arguing against each other. What is a machlekes that is shalol l'shem shemayim, that is not for the sake of heaven? Korach v'Adasai, Korach and his cronies. Doesn't say Korach and Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu was l'shem shemayim. It takes two to tango in a machlekes that is shalol l'shem shemayim. At the end of the day, the one that is accused of being not l'shem shemayim, not for the sake of heaven, it's only Korach. Moshe Rabbeinu came from the same perspective he was the entire time, and that is, I'm here to make sure that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ratzon, that his will, is being seen till the end. But if you're coming and you're not listening to the other person, and you're fighting against the other person, and you're arguing with the other person simply because you want to get your point across, and you know what it is that you have to say, so then that is, as the Gemara, as the Mishnah and the Mefarshim are saying over here, that's the machlekes that is shaloi l'shem shemayim. And he says like this, Ki machlekes shi l'shem shemayim cholkin rak al yikarim. When you have a machlekes where people are, for the sake of heaven, they're only arguing over the ikar, the main thing, which is the discussion at hand. Ve'mevatrin echad l'sheni v'shum panim va'oifen, aval echad medaber im hasheni va'oiva avas nefesh. Nevertheless, we never put the other person down. Rather, we speak to the other person with as our beloved. Avas hanefesh with a spiritual love. Ki asa lisnai shum bar Yisrael. You're not allowed to hate any single Jew. Af shu machzig aches men, even if he's holding a different opinion than I am. This is obviously not what we're seeing in front of us all of the time right now in Klal Yisrael. It's a very, very toxic nation that is taking place. All the things that are going on in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, as they would call it, the state. I think that's probably why it's in the state that it's in right now, with all the mess of the politics and the machlokes, the fighting, a day and night that goes on over there. That is not a machlokes al Shem Shemayim. There's no sake of heaven that's going on right now. It's become all covet and honor, and I'm right and you're wrong, and we're fighting. We're not fighting anymore about what's best for Klal Yisrael. We're fighting about what do I believe is the right way to go and what do you believe is the right way to go. So there's no L'Shem Shemayim. In the politics of the world today, in America, there's no L'Shem Shemayim. The conservatives hold this very strong, this strong, and the lefts hold this very strong. And they argue, and they have like little children when they were having their debates before the presidency. They were arguing with each other like babies. That's L'Shem Shemayim. To put another person down and try to make him look like a fool, that has nothing to do with L'Shem Shemayim at all. That has to do with my own egregious way of dealing with this world, that I feel that I am the one that has to be right and you're the one that has to be wrong. Whenever there is sin, whenever there is hatred between two people, that's what the Mishnah is saying over here. That's a sign that there's no L'Shem Shemayim, there's no sake of heaven that's going on. If we want to know what we are doing with ourselves, and we want to be able to recognize if there's L'Shem Shemayim in our actions, we just have to look that when we are dealing with another person, is there a trace of hatred that is there? If there's even a trace of hatred that is there, then we know that we're not arguing for the sake of heaven. If you can be honest with yourself and you can say, I don't even have 1 ounce of hatred. I love this person just as much as I did before we started having the argument. So then keep going. You're allowed to have the argument. You're allowed to have the discussion. You're allowed to make it work. But if not, not. A very famous story with Rav Ari Levine. When Ari Levine became a chassan, when he got engaged to his wife, to his Rebbetzin, who ended up being she was the daughter, hold on, make a mistake over here. She's the daughter of Eliashiv? No, the daughter of Eliashiv was Reb Zakarievsky. Reb Ari Levine, yes, Reb Ari Levine's daughter married Reb Eliashiv. Fine. So the wife of Reb Eliashiv, the wife of Ari Levine, when they became a chassan in Kala, so Ari Levine said to his wife, famously, he told her that, I know you're probably waiting for a beautiful bracelet and diamond earrings and a necklace, all the things that a nice chassan gets for his Kala, but I'm a very poor man. My family has no money at all. He said, but there's one thing that I can offer you, and this is the greatest gift that I can give you. And that is that any time that you and I have a discrepancy of one thing that I want and one thing that you want, and we're arguing with each other, Pats or La Gondola, that was probably the arguments that they would have back then. So he said, I'll tell you what, I'm always going to be a Mavater. I'm always going to give in. And I'm not going to start an argument with you. Even though it could be that I'm right. But it's not worth running the risk of where that argument is going to lead. So I'll always be Mavater. So his wife said, my dear chassan, she said, you probably want a beautiful chassan, a big wedding. You probably want to invite all your friends and all the bachim. Maybe you should come and dance like so many of your other friends have. She said, but we come from a very poor family. We can't afford anything like that. We'll probably have the smallest wedding that you could possibly imagine. A Corona chassan will have in the backyard someplace. So one thing I can promise you, and this is the gift that I'm going to give you. If we ever have a discrepancy, if we ever don't agree on something, I'll be a Mavater. I'll give in. And I'll never hold my ground. I'll always give in. See, imagine you have two people. They were tzaddikim to begin with. they would never make a machlekes anyway. You have two people, they lived their whole life together as a husband and a wife, and their goal was never ever to involve themselves in machlekes, in an argument. It could be that she was right, and it could be that he was right. Could be she was wrong and he was right, or he was right and she was wrong. Could be. Nevertheless, they understood that the safest thing to do is to avoid machlekes altogether. We're not on the madrega, we're not on the level that of Shammai and Hillel to say that I could actually argue something out and be l'shem shemayim and not have a trace of myself in. You walk into any base midrash today, and you will find that many of the people that are screaming at the top of their lungs and arguing is because they want to make sure that the other person hears that they are right and that the other person is wrong. There's so much covet, there's so much of the selfishness that's involved. A large part of the arguments that are going on inside the base midrash today is because of my own zich, my own self that's in there. A machlekes shalol l'shem shemayim, it will not be in the sky, it will not last. A machlekes that is for the sake of heaven, as we're saying over here, don't fool yourself. If you're really true and you're really honest and you're really sincere, go ahead, fight it away. But if not, person should stay away from machlekes. And Chazal are telling us over here, steer clear of every machlekes that you possibly can, because you'll never know if you're really l'shem shemayim or not. And if you're not, as he quotes all these chazals over here, ma'abed zichra, a person's whole memory from this world will get lost as a result of that. Nobody wants that. We zecher tzaddik livracha. We remember the tzaddik. We remember him for blessing. We'd all like to be remembered, and we'd all like our memory to live on forever and ever and ever and ever. And Be'ez Hashem, if we avoid a world of machlekes, a world of argumentation, and we do the best in our abilities to be mevater, to overlook and say, you know what, it's not worth it. If we would have learned from Korach and said, you know what, I'm just not going to get involved. I'm not going to fight Moshe Rabbeinu, and that would have been the end of the story, and Korach would still be alive, so would his great offspring, then we would live a life of avas Yisrael, a love between us, not a sinah, not a hatred. There would be no machlekes. The word machlekes is, the root of that word is chalak. Chalak, which means to be divided, but chalak is also smooth. If a person will avoid machlekes, they'll avoid all of this division and derision in their life, they'll have a smooth, a peaceful, and a happy life. Be'ez Hashem. Have a wonderful night, everybody, and we'll try to continue transitioning over here on the Zoom without having a machlekes between those of you on screen and those of you off screen, and we'll live happily ever after. Amen.